Coming up on Dialogue Weekend, the 6th plenum of the 19th CPC Central Committee has passed a landmark resolution. What's the news from this important meeting? The world's top chipmakers have responded to a US request for supply chain information that included unspecified consequences for non-compliance. What's behind the US demand, and what does it mean for the global chip shortage? And this week's newsmaker, now on Dialogue Weekend.
Welcome to this edition of Dialogue Weekend. I'm Li Qiuyuan. On Thursday, the 6th plenary session of the 19th CPC Central Committee adopted a landmark resolution on the major achievements and historical experience of the CPC's 100 years. So how has the CPC revealed its past, and what's the path for the future? To find out more about it, today, I'm glad to be joined by Einar Tengen, independent current affairs commentator, Andy Mock, senior research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Mr. Chu Qiang, assistant director of the International Monetary Institute at Renmin University of China. Welcome to you all. So let's talk about this. A press conference was held today on the 6th plenary session, and also the resolution adopted that meeting. Very important meeting, has captured the world's attention because a lot of people are trying to gauge policy directions. Let me start with you, Einar. What kind of sense are you getting there? What's the key message, key takeaways?
Well, this is the beginning of the third era for modern China. I mean, you had 4 years before the making of modern China, the Republic. You had a very important document that was authored by Mao, and then you had that again with Deng, and now you're having that with Xi. And what it is, after 100 years, you have to look back and reflect, what have you done right, what has been improved, and how do you go forward? And this is really very, very important. Under Mao, it was all about unifying the country, getting rid of the invaders. Under Deng, it was about rapid economic expansion. And today, it's about a more balanced, sustainable society.
The answer to very different questions corresponding with different times, right? Mr. Chu Qiang, what are your thoughts on the resolution if you're following this? We are seeing phrases that can interpret as, the party has demonstrated or established the core position of the president in the party, and also defined the guiding role of the president's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristic. How significant is that?
Well, I think this plenary actually showed many wisdoms and key points. As just my co-workers, Anna has just mentioned, we have been experiencing quite different target and different leadership in the past 70 years or 100 years of the CPC. And you will see that right now China has been facing the unprecedented uncertainty in the future. The COVID-19, to name the first, we'll see is interrupting or disrupting all of us. Nobody knows where the world is going. And also you're seeing the whole gap between the rich and the poor over the whole world has been larger and larger, and the productivities has been on a halt. So where are we going as a human being or as the whole Chinese people? So we have a saying in China, we are not sure about the future. It's better to look back into the history and review what's going on. And in each junction point, how did you tackle all these challenges? So this plenary basically looked over the history of the CPC and China, down the past wisdoms, and how do we solve the problems, what kind of lessons and mistakes we made, and how we overcome that. And then we make the new decision, like my coworker has mentioned, we need a more balanced development. We need to be green. We need to, redistribute our wealth between in a more balanced way. And we need to develop the technology, the hardcore technology, and not just the popular show-offs on the internet. So everything needs to be rethink again and redo again. Now we're on a new starting point.
Yeah, like you said, there is a heavy focus on the history. They look at the achievements and historical experiences that for the party in the past 100 years. Andy, what are some of the political legacies that you find most impressive?
Well, I think there are two things that we should pay attention to. One that people that follow China for a living recognize, and that is the Chinese system is unique. The political system is unique in that it very thoroughly integrates philosophy, history, and politics, whereas in the West, history and certainly philosophy is seen as a somewhat removed subject from real life. And this is very important. So I think, as we heard, this marks a new understanding of the integration of philosophy, history, and politics. But more importantly, for those that don't follow China very closely, I think this is historic because we look at the media coverage globally of this. Really has received enormous coverage that has been largely neutral, and I think this is showing that China really has broken through globally and is being recognized for its historic achievements. There is a China scholar at the University of Oxford that recently said, because of its enormous scale with more than 90 million members, its competence in addressing enormous challenges, that the CPC is the most successful political party of all time. And I think despite the negative biases we've seen in Western media, that is starting to break through, and this is an important milestone.
So we've looked at the past. Einar, looking into the future, what's also required for the party and the country to get into a better position in global affairs?
Well, it's not all up to China. I mean, there's going to be a necessity to be fairly creative because you have the U.S., which sees China as a threat to its global hegemony. And isn't kind of adjusting to this idea that the world has become multipolar. And I'm not saying going to, it already is. You've seen this at the G20. You see it at COP26. At all of these meetings, the U.S. in some cases is a little defensive. Other cases they're pulling back or they're being very assertive, as in the South China Seas. So China needs to really think about how it can deal with the reality of the United States. The fact is, though, that the United States and China sit on top of the existing pyramid that defines the world, and I mean economically, etc. So it behooves both of them, and Europe, and all the developed countries and everyone else, to stop fighting amongst each other and start trying to figure out how they can grow together. And there's no better example than COVID.
Right. A lot of people are pointing out this rivalry between the United States and China are going to intensify in the future. Do you think that, Andy, the party has the right way, right tool to deal with this kind of rivalry, the differences, the mistrust, misunderstanding?
I do. I mean, I am a bit more optimistic, I think, than a lot of observers here in that I see an emerging, at least grudging respect for China on the part of the United States. And we have to recognize, of course, this is a very, very difficult psychological adjustment for the U.S. to make, that its very existence is predicated on superiority, whether that's technological superiority or a sense of superiority in its political system. And what China has demonstrated is that there are other ways that can work as well, if not better, in certain circumstances. And that this is really an existential challenge to the United States, and it's going to take time for it to cope. But I think reality, of course, ultimately prevails. And to paraphrase Warren Buffett, who talked about the stock market, that in the short term, it's a voting machine, in the long term, it's a weighing machine, it's a scale. And similarly, I think geopolitics is the same, that reality ultimately prevails. And this is what we're watching, although through a somewhat extended process.
There's ideological differences between East and West, right? The difference is immense. They run completely different political systems. How are you looking at this, Mr. Chu?
Oh, I never mind about this political differences or ideology difference. Well, we have a saying in our study that we say the economy is for decades and the politics are for centuries, but the culture is for thousands of years. Well, please just look back into the history. You will find China is the only ancient civilization or culture which developed continuously for more than 5,000 years, uninterrupted. It never stopped. You know, what we're writing is similar to our ancestors 5,000 years ago. And well, another fun fact is that we all come from different racial or genetic background, cultural background. My ancestor, for example, is Khitanish Mongolian. We come to China mainland like 2,000 years ago, and now we're Chinese, the same, like the Southern Chinese, Northern Chinese, and Eastern Chinese. We use Chinese culture, language, and etc. We share the same value. And more importantly is that China never wanted to bother the other civilization or culture. It's more like you can live your life and we live our life. We never want to teach other people or interfere other people. So probably in the past 100 years, since we have two world war, a lot of people especially the mainstream geopolitical thinking, is thinking, well, anyone who has the power to interfere, they must well do that. But China won't just wait for another 200 years or 500 years or 1,000 years. China will prove itself, but it doesn't need to, because it has been here for more than 1,000 years, and it will be for next thousands and thousands of years.
One of the thorny issue I do want to touch on is the matter of Taiwan, right? Let me get your take on this, Einar. The resolution we talked about also brought up the phrases such as opposing external interferences and firmly grasp the leading position of initiatives in cross-strait relations. What does it say about the party's position on this matter?
Well, Taiwan isn't going anywhere, and quite frankly, it's written into the Chinese constitution that Taiwan is an integral part of the mainland. So nothing has changed, but there does have to be new initiatives. China is battling the U.S. There's some thought that the U.S. wants to use Taiwan, in essence, as a pawn in a political game, where even if China were to in essence, try to goad China into doing something to Taiwan, and then say, "Oh, look, Taiwan, China's a terrible country," and things like that. I'm pretty certain that the Chinese, the Beijing, they know and understand what the U.S. is trying to do. You might remember when General Milley called, he mentioned in his testimony that the Chinese government and military was concerned that Donald Trump wanted to goad Beijing into attacking Taiwan so that he could declare a state of emergency or use this for political points.
This is something that we'll be closely watching for sure. Let's move on to our next topic of the day. The U.S. government gave a deadline of November 8th for the world's top semiconductor chip makers, automakers, and others to submit chip data in the name of boosting supply chain transparency. And the companies involved made their responses of the past Monday. But what is the United States going to do with the data submitted? And how will this move impact its industry? Well, Andy, let me start with you. The American government now is basically forcing all the global chip makers to submit highly classified information, right? Sales data, inventory data, number of orders. Isn't that a violation of business confidentiality, no matter how the Commerce Department justify it?
Well, I think first of all, we need to recognize just how crucial silicon is to the global economy. Share a recent anecdote with you. So we all know that it used to be that at least the myth is that Chinese people used to greet each other by asking, "Have you eaten yet?" The new greeting, at least in the auto industry, is, "Have you bought your chips yet?" So it's really top of mind for many, many industries. And I think this is why companies around the world are concerned about this. And there is an enormous, enormous possibility for major, major problems with the U.S. doing something like this. So first we have to understand this is a very real problem for countries all around the world. So the U.S. wanting to solve this problem makes a lot of sense. But like Afghanistan, perhaps as we're seeing how the economic situation in the U.S. is unfolding with inflation, the measures it's taking might be not only ineffective but counterproductive, because by doing this, it is certainly creating a lot of problems for companies around the world. It's also opening the door for other governments to take similar actions, and that could be very, very damaging to trust, to supply chains, and perhaps ultimately to solving this shortage.
If the United States want to solve this problem, this is a global supply chain problem. Why shouldn't it be a global effort, Mr. Chuqiang? Why not? What gives the right to the United States to think that it alone can solve this global problem? Why not? If the United States is requiring all the information to go public, why not share it with the international community?
Well, actually, the chips are like huge hardware. If God have a shape, I think a chip will be his wand. By waving this wand, you can control most part of the modern economy and the world. But to be very frankly, well, America is the one who, in the first place, make this situation happen, or at least facilitate the situation. Remember, China and the U.S. Has been on the confrontation on the use of the chips or the shipment of the chips. And that confrontation caused the Silicon Valley lost 30% of the jobs because they cannot sell it to China. So China has to rebuild the supply chain inside the country. So the whole global supply chain is like a very delicate machine, like a clockwork. So with even just a little bit to punch on it, you will see very different result. And you see this major change happen led by America. But of course, we come after we see the COVID-19, the internet, the international shipment difficulties, and etc. So all these things make this very delicate, supply chain has been changed, and we now need to rebuild it. And rebuild it need time and energy and lots of money. So in the past, we see there's a pyramid like America Design, and then the TSMC and the Samsung like the producer, and the China like the assembly, and then the user. And suddenly everything changes. You want to break this pyramid into several different pyramids and independent from each other. So everybody, when this happens, everybody wants to dominate this separation, want to have the most of the power during this great, separation of the whole industry and supply chain. So I think that's the reason why Americans so urgently want to control the data behind the chips. Well, I understand why they're going to do this, but I'm sure this is going to be very difficult, and they were going to get the backfire from the industry.
Heiner, do you see it that way? A possible maneuver to target China in order to attain global leadership in the chip making industry? I mean, a lot of people are pointing out that by requiring these information, they could sanction Chinese company possibly in a more precise way.
Well, yeah, I think it's just the kind of post-hypocrisy world that we live in. Imagine if it was China demanding this information and what the U.S. would do and say. Quite frankly, this is a bully move. Gina Raimondo said that if you don't give it to me voluntarily, I'll use all these acts against you. I don't know that they would have actually worked out legally from a legal perspective.
Is that even legitimate for a government?
It is not legitimate for a government. And the irony is that this is what the U.S. says about China all the time, that they're doing forced technology transfers. This is as big a forced technology transfer as anybody has ever seen. To literally say that we want this information. Now, the companies have fuzzied the information that they're giving.
Yeah.
They don't want to give proprietary lists. They don't want to give, the government isn't just asking where are the chips, because that's what the auto industry wants to know. They think that there's some sort of collusion going on, or that somebody's hoarding chips, or they're keeping them away and artificially driving the price. But what you have here now is they're asking about research cycles. They want to know specifics as to who the clients are and what kind of technologies they're doing, because these are foundries. These are, and by that I mean, these are places that build custom chips for individual companies, and there's a competitive advantage in that. So having this information, it would have enormous power. And remember, it's the U.S. has said that they want to get into the chip business. What better way than knowing what everybody is doing? So this is another example of where Joe Biden is great in the room. When he was in the room with the automakers, they said, we want this information, all right, get it for us. But he didn't really think through what the repercussions would be for everyone else. He's violating the sovereignty of these other countries. And these are allies, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. They're not happy about it, and I don't blame them. But it's another ham-handed, strong-arm tactic from somebody who says that he wants to work with everybody.
About these fuzzy documents that you mentioned, a lot of companies did submit, the document, but without, these highly classified information, like you mentioned. But if the U.S. government is not satisfied with it, what could happen next? Could there be next moves to force these companies to supply those information that they really needed?
Gina Raimondo said that she used the Defense Authorization Act, which in essence she could say that this is, it affects the security of the United States. Now remember, this was the same thing that was used against TikTok and other companies, and they fended it off. So I really do think this is a bluff. She's just trying to get as much information, but she's really, these are ham-handed moves. This is not helping American soft power by, accusing other people of doing things and then doing it themselves. Really post-hypocrisy.
Mr. Chuxiang, how are you looking at this? Because the biggest concern here is how the U.S. government would use these data, right? Do you think the companies not from the U.S. might suffer, because of the data submission?
Of course, this is very obvious because every company with this high tech are running their business because they have this top secret. The top secret is the design for the chips, the algorithm for the chips, and the structure for the chips. Because only in this world, only like a few companies master this technology to build chips for the whole human beings. Well, this is not a healthy structure at all, but this is how we get right now. When America asks companies to, help them, well, not ask them, but help them voluntarily, release their data. Well, basically, they're releasing their top business secret. And if you ask Coca-Cola to show out their recipes for the Coca-Cola, if you ask the McDonald's, to give out their recipe for the ketchups, I don't know what's going to happen and what people are going to comment on that. But basically, we're seeing this is going to be a major disruption to the whole industry. But hey, I'm not full pessimistic. Probably there's going to be some good thing happening in there. Eventually, this technology is going to be spread out to the militaries, and with the militaries, and then we'll spread it to the other civil industries, and then everybody masters the technology to build the chips, and eventually the whole cost for the chips and the production amount for the chips will be largely boosted, or the cost will be lowered. Eventually, probably going to be a good thing for the whole human beings.
Andy, I guess so much for a fair and free market that the United States has been touted for so long.
Yes. Well, I think also this raises a lot of concerns. So again, I think if we look at it in a slightly naive way, it completely makes sense that this is a problem. The chip shortage is a severe problem that needs to be solved. But the way the U.S. is going about it really is counterproductive. And we have to look at the optics as well. So the U.S. government has been implicated in the past helping American companies in an illegitimate way. And we need to remember, too, that companies like Intel are looking to get back into the foundry business. There are other competitive implications as well. And the semiconductor industry is enormously capital intensive and R&D intensive. So companies are making enormous bets. So this information is very, very sensitive, very, very valuable. So I think the U.S. wanting to do the right thing, but perhaps going about it in a way that will be self-destructive.
Let's now take a look at this week's Newsmaker. Starting in 2009, November 11th has been known as Double 11, and this annual shopping festival has generated a frenzy in China's huge domestic market for more than a decade, with staggering revenues that have set new records each year. So how have Chinese consumers enjoyed this Chinese version of Black Friday this year? And what are the new trends for online shopping in China? Mr. Chu, let me start with you this time. How are you looking at this year's shopping spree? Because a lot of people are seeing people returning to more rational shopping. We see less flashy performances, flashy discounts. Is that also the sense you're getting for this year?
Yeah, I've been part of this shopping frenzy myself. To be very frankly, I spent $10,000 on the very day of the shopping frenzy. I probably wouldn't have any food left for the rest of the months. I'm very happy, but I'm not very happy. I'm happy because I have a lot of things I really need to buy. They do provide some teeny tiny discount on it. But I'm not happy because the discount is really not very satisfying Well, you see, the Double 11 shopping festival has been there for more than 13 years. It's nothing new. People are anticipating this for a very long time, and people getting used to it. And more than before, we have many participants been there. Not only the Taobao or Tmall, but also JD, but also the PDD, and etc. and etc. It's a long tail in there. And also, you're seeing that China has right now been fulfilled by lots of like shopping festival. We also have the 18th of the June, and also we have some other New Year festival, Xmas and something. We all have discount on that. So every year there are going to be something to just try to boost your shopping frenzy. So I guess people are just losing their interest on that, and also because all this competition is happening in there, so the shoppers probably wouldn't have that much motive to provide more of the discount like before. So I think this probably is going to get into some normal daily things of China.
And a notable difference this year, Einar, is that the major e-commerce platforms like JD.com, Taobao, they didn't release their numbers immediately after the day, which is a sharp contrast to the past. Why is that? Why are these platforms going low profile this year?
Well, Alibaba is the one who created this sensation, the Double 11. Now, that used to be one day. Now it's 11 days. They did top out last year's. They're 84 billion US. Imagine that. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, a lot of money.
Yeah, and what was interesting, though, is JD has been creeping up on them. They were at 54 billion US. And they had a quite nice increase. They were around over 25%, whereas Alibaba only hit 8%. But there were some real changes in the way they did it. There was, as was said, they were kind of fooling with the discounts, and that put some people off. And also, towards the end, they were starting to stress social responsibility. I think they put together $156,000 for an elephant sanctuary, and they were talking about things like this. But it does reflect a more sober mood, and very much in line with this kind of 100-year look back. China has moved a tremendous distance, but there are a lot of people who can remember there were times when it wasn't so great. And going towards a sustainable future in view of the energy issues that we're facing, climate changing, I think this is having an effect.
Right. Any major trends, differences you are noticing this year, Andy?
Well, I would say that to offer a little bit of a counterpoint to what we just heard, that I think that Double 11 really has done well for a couple of reasons. So first, I believe total sales were about $140 billion, which would put it in the top 60 economies of the world, equal to, say, Kuwait or Ukraine. And one of the interesting trends, I think, is that consumers have become acclimated, that this has become a ritual. Every year, people pay attention to Double 11, perhaps like Black Friday in the United States. And it's part of their lives, part of what they're used to doing. And I think that's very important. The other part I want to mention, though, is that the rise of the Chinese consumer. So Double 11 is part of, I think, this macro growth story that the other piece of it would be CIIE, the China International Import Expo that was just held. And this is showing that the Chinese consumer market is continuing to grow, continuing to open to the world and offer many, many opportunities. And they're not just opportunities for the Fortune 500, the big companies of the world. But we look at, let's say, a CIIE, the United Nations, a number of the United Nations organizations are key partners. And why is that? Because this also provides developing countries, SMEs, small and medium-sized businesses in developing countries, a way out of poverty by offering products that can be sold in China.
And a lot of global buyers, overseas consumers are also participating in this shopping festival, which I think is great. All right, that's all the time we have for now.